Well, it's a beautiful Wednesday morning here in Lagos, Nigeria. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily. I'm Kayode Okikiolu. I know this is a time a lot of people perhaps are getting a cup of something, a cup of tea, cup of coffee, cup of pap, whatever works for you, right? And something quite interesting, is brewing, I should say, and I use that advisedly, but not the coffee kind of brewing. It's the cocoa, a chocolate kind of brewing in Cross River State. Now, this has been in the news for a while, as far back as 2019. Prior to that time, but COVID-19 came and it sort of delayed work. And what am I talking about? I'm talking about Ecom chocolate. Now this is, not just so much about Cross River or Ecom as it is about the Nigerian situation, and this is what I mean. If you take a look at the trade figures for the first quarter of this year, you'd see that about 70% of our trade was essentially imports and the rest exports. So that gave us minus 3.9 billion trade deficit. So essentially, if you look at those figures, the breakdown of the figures, you realize that we export a lot of raw resources like cocoa, of course, crude oil, top on that list as well, and a lot of other things, only to import them as processed. So we export cocoa beans, for example, a little bit processed, and we import chocolate, we import a lot of, and when I say chocolate, I mean the bars, the drinks, and the rest. But, Cross River State is trying to change the narrative. Like I said, it's been on the front burner for a while now, and it's good to see that in Ecom, there's a processing plant, a processing factory that is meant to process cocoa beans and just essentially give those byproducts from chocolate to the drinks to liquor and the rest. And for the governor, he's quite audacious, saying that for the period that the processing factory will run, the state will essentially halt all cocoa export, raw cocoa export. So that means from Cross River State, going by the words of the governor, there will be no more exports of cocoa beans, at least when this comes on stream. And the possibilities are quite endless, if you ask me. The global cocoa or chocolate industry is about $100 billion. Yes, it's worth $100 billion. Nigeria, yes, yours truly, is the fourth largest cocoa producer in the world. So, by that, naturally, you expect that Nigeria should get a sizable chunk of that industry. But no, in 2019, NIPC said we got just about how many billion naira? $1 million, 300 and something million dollars. And that's grossly inadequate when you look at countries that don't even plant cocoa are making billions of dollars from it. So it's a good one, I should say. I'm not quite sure when this will come on stream. Like I said, it's been on since 2019, 2021, 2021. So we do hope that this will come on stream anytime soon. But how about you, just watch this? Yes, you might not be able to taste that chocolate just yet. In fact, the governor said it's quite good and organic. But take a look at this and just imagine the possibilities, not just for cocoa, but a lot of our resources in Nigeria. Nigeria is the fourth largest producer of cocoa in the world, a position that should naturally earn it a substantial share of the global cocoa industry, valued at $100 billion. In 2019, however, the nation generated $317.5 million from cocoa exports to countries like the Netherlands and others. Ironically, in the same period, the Netherlands generated more than ×2, with $696 million from processing imported cocoa beans and exporting it as cocoa powder. Cross River State is determined to cross to this next level by establishing a cocoa processing factory in Ecom local government, an area known for cultivating and exporting large quantities of cocoa. To ensure the facility is ready for business, Governor Ben Oyade pays a visit as the staff here walk him through the chocolate-making process. From tree to bar, Ecom Chocolate is expected to bring a new variety of made-in-Nigeria organic product to consumers.
What is special about the Ecom cocoa is a special slight bitter taste. Now, most other cocoa products like chocolates, what you find is very sugary and very sweet, very fattening and very unhealthy. But the Ecom chocolate, our own chocolate brand, we try to use only the neem and get you the best of ingredients, which contains that slight bitter taste. And that taste is an antioxidant, which is particularly good for the body.
And to ensure the smooth running of the factory, the state has engaged the services of experienced hands.
The factory is actually set up to process cocoa, and in the process they will generate cocoa butter, they will generate cocoa powder and cocoa liquor. What you're seeing here at the chocolate factory is just a small segment of it.
The plan is to halt all cocoa export from the state and divert them to this location, where the state hopes to get a bigger share of the global chocolate pie and create more jobs, thereby setting a good example for other cocoa producing states to follow. I may have tipped today's balance in favor of cocoa as opposed to coffee for some people. Chamberlain, I'm sure you feel like cocoa.
Well, yeah, I mean, good morning, everybody. But you know, it's quite interesting how they said, look, our cocoa revenue can hit $1.1 billion in 5 years if only we learn to do some things right. You know, part of the concern which several people raise and will continue to raise because there's a reason is the big word, continuity. So we do hope that there will be that structure such that when one leaves, another comes in, it continues. Look at our West African neighbors here. I mean, they export cocoa huge. Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, they've got that consistency. So we hope that power supply won't be a challenge here. Just hope. I might add, anyway. It's good. It's good to see all of that though coming through. But speaking of which, talking about lots of financial matters, as it were, Vanguard leads with that as well. Foreign loans to hit $45 billion as FG bids to borrow $4 billion more. The rider, the first of which says Buhari writes Senate for additional $4 billion, $4.054 billion, and then 710 million euros, I guess. And then, because the paper can't see the symbol here, it's kind of confusing, but that's what it is. $125 million loan. So all of that as that first of those riders. So if you pick that up, you see that there. External loans rise 366% since 2015. Debt servicing now a burden, ascribed to analysts. Decries Buhari's lack of repayment plan. PDP blasts Buhari APC over fresh loans request. So that's equally fine there. So it's a big lead for them on the front page here this morning. And then just at the bottom strip, IPOB sits at home, triggers outrage, condemnation. No riders whatsoever. So that is what you see. And then this piece of news came through, yesterday, and it's tucked in right here. Rivers drags FG to Supreme Court over VAT revenue. So lots of revenue issues, financial issues, and then you see this one to the Supreme Court. I mean, many have said yes, it will end up at the Supreme Court, but they didn't see, some didn't just see this particular one. They're asking for them to disband that panel set up by the Court of Appeal and several other priors.
Just picturing the wordings of that headline, drags, and you just picture dragging. But clearly this is not over, especially because the River State government is quite worried that the government or FIRS might want to delay this. But the appeal court gave them 2 days to consider this and submit. So, clearly, in fact, I'll wait for the front page of the Nigerian Tribune to show you something.
Yeah, but let me look at the back page of Vanguard. There's Vanguard Sports there, and goodness. Young Boys 2, Man United 1. Lingard's howler gifts victory to Young Boys. So that was how. Yeah. Well, I'm not sure to use the word cookie crumble. It's just the beginning of some of those. So, but depends on the context actually. But then Champions League continues today. Zlatan out of AC Milan's clash against Liverpool. Is that a boost, or would it be a motivation for Milan to do what they do?
You know, it would seem young boys did not read that script that you're meant to give Ronaldo a fantastic welcome to the EPL and to the Champions League. Clearly, they were not in for all that. Next up is the front page of the Nigerian Tribune, and as you'll expect, the lead, Buhari seeks approval for fresh $4 billion, 710 million euros loans. President APC selling Nigeria, says PDP. It's a classic, really, and you'll expect this. It's on page 2. But what are the details, really? I mean, what does this mean in this overall scheme of things, not just for today, next 5, 10, 20 years ahead? It's a lot of questions, especially with the recent projection. We'll be delving into that definitely today. It's a page 2 read on the front page of the Nigerian Tribune this morning. And you see that one, IPOB bows to pressure, cancels sit-at-home order, page 26. Now, remember the VAT conversation, right? Guess what? Ogun joins VAT war. Bill passes second reading at Assembly. So Rivers, Lagos, Ogun. I wonder who's next. So clearly states are not sitting down on this one. Page 2.
Whoa. So it means, look, no matter what's going on out there, at the center, they just keep doing what they're doing.
I mean, we had a conversation with a member of the Lagos State House of Assembly saying, well, we've made the law, we're lawmakers, right? And we'll implement the law.
So it means, what, if the state doesn't obey, the state will be breaking the law?
Well,
This is
quite interesting one.
I speak about testing the laws.
Oh, yes.
So many laws to test here.
Absolutely. And you see that one, COVID-19, Edo begins enforcement of restriction for unvaccinated persons. Yes, we did report that as well. And it's meant to start today, September the 15th. So let us know, I mean, if you're a civil servant in Edo State, let's know your experience, how this is playing out. Edo begins enforcement of restriction for unvaccinated persons. So is this just for civil service? What about the private sector? How about that, the pushback? I think it was taken to court as well.
Yeah, I hope it is well thought out, though. Much as, yes, people are encouraged to go ahead and get vaccinated while they can. Know your allergies, get doctors, whatever it is. If you're safe, you think you're good to go. If you want, if your health allows you to, but I hope it's well thought out, basically, yes. Because it could have ripple effect. We know of some cases in some other climes how they tried to effect some of these things and didn't quite go as planned. And some other areas think it's going as planned globally, but with this one, who knows?
Just to mention that 114 out of 206 fleeing inmates have been recaptured. So we have how many to go? 152?
How do these things happen? You know, when over 200 escape, you just go 100 and something, you're back.
Maybe they were camped in a place, so it was easy. But I mean, you have to give it to our security agencies, right? I mean, they employed the services of Interpol. They're doing a great job. I mean, going by this particular one. Backpage, of course, has that sports story. Ronaldo scores and Mayu's lost to young boys and did it good for Mayu. All right, that's the Nigerian Tribune for you. Good morning, Markwe.
Good morning, gentlemen. I hope that your night was restful. Quite an interesting conversation you've been having. Let's quickly take a look at the front page of The Guardian for you this morning. They have this one, focusing on the debts as well. Buhari overlooks 33 trillion naira debt burden, 6 fresh 2 trillion naira loans. PDP economists kick as party urges NAS to probe alleged looting of loans. Okay, now this would be worrisome. About 85% of matured loans are refinanced, economist suggests. You can't take more when 80% of revenue goes into debt. Or you want to find out who's speaking. And Lagos to borrow 25 billion naira as Sanwo-Olu signs green bond market agreement. So it's all about loans this morning. You might want to know who's speaking this morning, status. Well, of course, also watch the program this morning. But that's what the front page of The Guardian is saying. They have a number of other stories. Sit at home. Gunmen kill Anglican priest. Set vehicles ablaze as IPOB dissociates group from violence. Day 2 records full compliance in Southeast. Action paralyzes commercial activities, cripples the economy. Don't obey Monday sit-at-home order henceforth That's someone speaking. IPOP spokesman apologizes for destructions, promises to repair damages. And you also see there, Huriwa asks Indigbo to hold Southeast governors accountable. So quite a lot is happening in the Southeast. Gunmen kill Anglican priest, set vehicles ablaze as IPOP dissociates group from violence. You have a number of other stories just beneath the nameplate. UAE tags 6 Nigerians, others as Boko Haram terrorism financiers. And on sports news, Okagbare loses appeal, begins 4-year ban over banned drugs. Oh, that's a pretty sad one there. Let's leave it there for The Guardian.
Wow. All News Direct is next. Economic growth. Lots of economic matters today. Buhari orders banks to finance SMEs, renewable energy, others. Says 8 million Nigerians benefiting from conditional cash transfer. CBN to launch Nigerian International Finance Center by 2022. Releases 300 billion naira to 3.1 million smallholder farmers. So the SMEs, the engine of growth, how they need that support, lots of backbone they can provide to any economy in the world. So this directive for banks, and quite interesting. We do remember also that, the reason why some of these interventionist programs were anchored by the CBN because the DMBs just, weren't forthcoming for some reason, as concerning some of those, and that's why you had those domiciled in special specified banks, and experts did raise that concern. So has that changed? Well, with this order, many will be hoping that it will perhaps provide the needed oomph, as it were, for things to go as it should. But right about that, several others. But look at this one: 5 trillion naira AMCON debt. IGP directs all AIGs, CPs to support recovery drive. And I had some conversation with certain persons in some quarters about, real assets, some of these facilities that have been either recovered or in custody of either AMCON, the EFCC, or the ICPC. If you look at all of those, there are trillions that have just, they're languishing. Property, vehicles, those real assets, you just ask yourself, look, and some of them are dilapidated. No value can come through from some of them whatsoever. You have to spend a lot more to resuscitate them. So shouldn't we be having that kind of conversation? So when these assets are in certain positions, can those things run independent of those persons who are under investigation so that the economy doesn't take further hit, as it were? But I guess
I think there was a conversation around having what an agency to
have their common stream, because if you go to Lagos office, Abuja offices, you see all of those are real, and you wonder what's going on here. But who knows?
Well, Daily Trust is next. You're wondering what's going on the front page. Well, it's not quite economic, right?
Oh.
It's more security. And you see, Daily Trust, quoting several sources, says vicious ISWAP leader Al-Barnawi killed. That name might ring a bell. And the writers, how he succeeded his father, Boko Haram founder Mohammed Yusuf, led terrorists' onslaught on security forces. But then take a look at what the military is saying. We're not aware of his death. As experts say, a situation dicey. So Daily Trust tries to give some insight into this one. In fact, gives an illustration as well. I think it's quite hard to come by his picture. But right under that, you see the economic talk. FG's borrowing spree continues as Buhari seeks fresh 2.2 trillion naira loan. Page 18, yet again, another talking point, right? I'll give you the informed perspectives, definitely. There's also that one: bandits abduct Zamfara Emir in Kaduna Abuja highway attack. Learned security operative was killed. A really sad one, definitely. And just one more: PDP governors to National Assembly. Delay in Electoral Act amendment threatens 2023 polls. Page 31. Well, it's been passed, right? It's not been harmonized quite, but you expect that there shouldn't be much of a delay anymore. I mean, they're back to work. So
you never can tell with some of these things, really. It's just never straightforward.
Okay, well, we'll keep our eyes on that one. That's Daily Trust newspaper.
Take a look at leadership for you, and they have this: sustain onslaught until terrorists are routed. Senate tells troops here. So it seems to be flowing from what we also see on the front, even though the military says they're not aware of the death of al-Banawi. But who knows what has happened. But this is what you find on the front page. Sustain onslaught until terrorists are routed. Senate tells troops. Army boosts troops operations with communication vehicles. Air chief urges vigilance. Autumn wants offensive against bandits in North Central. UAE declares 6 Nigerians wanted for terrorism. So that is all on the front page of leadership newspapers this morning. Look at this. Open grazing ban, security top agenda as southern governors meet. And look at this. PDP kicks as PMB seeks NAS approval for 3 trillion naira loan. Yeah, so they've converted the funds for you into naira, and depending on what exchange rate you use, you'll either get 2 trillion or you get 3 trillion naira. So, but make up your mind. It's $4 billion that has been requested here. Look at this. 13 die, Jigawa building collapse, auto crash. A number of people will lose to road accidents, will lose to building collapse, bridge collapse. I don't know. If we were to put all of that together, you know, I'm sure we should be declaring a state of emergency by now. 32 months after commissioning, Barrow Port lies desolate. So sometimes it will seem that there's a lot of fanfare around commissioning, but after that, nothing happens. It's a page 4 read for you, but they have a number of other stories. We'll leave it there for leadership newspapers.
New Telegraph is the next one we've got for you this morning. APC dumps Akonde-led National Reconciliation Committee, constitutes fresh one led by ex-Governor Adamu. That's the big lead right there. I remember we talked about the congresses yesterday. So now you've got this one.
Reconciliation committees.
Oh boy. Who blinks first, perhaps? But just at the bottom strip, you equally find, pray for us, those against anti-open grazing law planning evil. Akeredolu vows to protect the people at any cost. Enugu, Akwa Ibom, sign bill. So, while at that, insecurity, Nigeria's biggest challenge, says Lawan. So that you equally find there. Yeah. But it's good to know that amid COVID-19, domestic air travel shows quick recovery. So that's not a bad one there. New Telegraph this morning.
Well, let's run through the Daily Times for you with this one. How FG is sustaining economic growth in post-COVID-19 era. Finance Minister. It's quite important to hear from government regarding this one. Nigeria Infrastructure Fund to commence in October, says CBN, as Apex Bank sets to join League of International Financial Centers. So that's the big one on the front page of the Daily Times. But let me just take 2 headlines for you quickly. And this one is on politics. I have no plans to unseat Sanwo-Olu as Lagos governor. But Abiamila, you may have caught that interview with the speaker, the exclusive, a political paradigm program where he spoke at length about various issues. So a part of what he said. And at the bottom strip, 1.6 million households benefiting from FG's CCTP. You wonder what that is? We'll find out on the inside pages of the Daily Times newspaper.
All right, that wraps it up with a look at some of the dailies here this morning. Just stay with us because we will be back in a moment.
Welcome back. Well, we're now going to be focusing on a celebration which is happening today. It's International Democracy Day. Yes, today is International Democracy Day. There is a whole day set aside to celebrate that form of government which is tagged, or which is defined as government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Well, this form of democracy we have practiced now since 1999, and a number of people can tell you, what they feel about how far we've gone. I'm sure if we do a poll about what our democracy has been like, it certainly will be a mixed bag. But then we will have experts in our studio today to tell us just how we're faring. I mean, are we really along the path of democracy? Does democracy have to be there for you to have development? Because oftentimes there's been this big debate about whether it is democracy you truly need to have development, whether democracy is really suited, at least democracy as practiced elsewhere, is suited to our own demographic here in Nigeria. But what do I know? Let us introduce our guests in the studio this morning. We have with us Dr. Saeed Hussaini, you're the Director of Research at the Center for Democracy and Development. Welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
And Dr. Okey Ikechukwu, Executive Director of Development Specs Academy. It's always a pleasure to have you in our studios.
My pleasure.
In Abuja. Well, let's quickly, sink our teeth into the discussion. Democracy. Usually, I don't know, the word seems to have become ubiquitous, if you ask me, meaning different things to different people. But if you were to assess from what we know and from what we take as the generic definition of democracy, how would you say that we have fared in terms of not just our selection process, but in terms of even how we throw up the candidate, if that is also going to be a part of the democratic process, and how we get along in terms of, getting the form of government we've chosen to deliver what we now call the dividends of democracy. Let me come to you, Dr. Hussaini. I'd like to hear, I have spoken with Dr. Ikechukwu a few times, so let's hear what your perspective are in terms of Nigeria's journey so far along this path of democracy.
Okay, thank you. I think just setting out the big picture, our return to democracy in 1999 was quite a laudable achievement for a country which, through its history, has, of course, had a lot of dark periods of authoritarian rule. And as you were setting out the introduction, you talked about the fact that there's an ongoing debate about whether or not democracy is the most appropriate form of government for achieving development or for a context like ours. But our own experience, I think, is the best answer to that question. Because, of course, in the period when we had autocratic rule in the form of a military dictatorship, the development strides that were achieved were minimal at best. So for that reason, a lot of people were elated when democracy returned in 1999. And, of course, a lot of people fought for it across social and political spectrums. And the fact that we've managed since then to maintain a regular practice of elections every 4 years is hugely laudable for a country at our stage of economic development, for a country as diverse as ours, for a country as large as ours. So there are, of course, things to celebrate today, and it's appropriate on a day like this to also reflect on those markers of, let's say, progress. At the same time, of course, we shouldn't deceive ourselves. Nigerians across the country are dissatisfied with the pace of democracy, understood, I think, as a process designed to transfer power from the elite, be they economic or traditional, to ordinary people. As you were saying in the introduction, fundamentally, it's a system of government that promises to give people the capacity to govern themselves. So the question to answer on a day like this is, can we or are we exercising that capacity to govern ourselves as ordinary citizens? And it's clear that we're not exercising it as much as we desire, right? There are limitations of all sorts that are placed on the average Nigerian, barring them from fully exercising that democratic franchise. So there's many more battles to be fought, but some have been won from the perspective of actually at least getting our social, political, economic elite to concede that indeed it is our right to cast the ballot and choose our leadership.
So many, I don't know, let's say paradoxes you raised there. And also, it's pretty simple, but it's also pretty deep in terms of when you look at what has happened. I do know that there are people who sometimes when they talk about how we have transitioned from from autocratic rule to a democracy, from military rule. I was looking for that word, military rule. They sometimes say, oh, the soldiers just removed their uniform and donned their agbadas, and business as usual continued. I was somewhere yesterday, they were talking about the mindset that needed to change. That for many years we were under the military rule, authoritarian rule, and it was seen that when we changed form of government, the mindset really did not change. And it was seen that somehow we as a people, maybe we're not quite sure what to expect, and we're being told, it's your right. I mean, even now, we still have lots of campaign telling people, this is a democracy. You have the right to do this. There's so many, you are involved in those kinds of campaigns at your organization. But let me come to you, Dr. Ikechukwu, whether you think that we have fully made the transition. He talked about the people's power to govern themselves, as opposed to the elite, because somehow it looks like there is a dichotomy. Is it a false narrative, or is it really something that needs to happen where the people truly feel empowered? Are they the ones empowering the elite, or is it that the elite should transfer power to the people? How do you see this divide?
I don't really see a divide. What I see is that democracy calls for responsible management of power, of state power, to benefit both the people and the elite. Now, you started with a definition, and I'd like to take us back to that. Government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And I ask myself, between 1999 and today, which people have benefited from democracy? Those who have benefited from democracy are actually people who have held political office. Their personal affairs are much better. They are in greater control of their economic affairs. They have more influence. They can drive you and I off the road as they go.
Yes, you say you don't see a divide.
No. I say fundamentally.
Yes.
In the ideal setting, the business of democracy is to give all of us space.
Indeed.
So I now migrated back to why we're not there.
Okay.
That in place of this ideal, this is what we have today. And you raised the question at the commencement of this conversation about whether the processes are on, whether we can look at, do we have party democracy? The answer is no. Across all the political parties, whether in power or not, because candidates are not chosen democratically. We know that. We can pretend that it is not so. So when the question is asked, have we gained? I'll not only say no, I'll add that we have actually retrogressed. Retrogressed to the point that at the commencement of this democracy, there was the illusion of local government chairmen, councillors, and the rest of it. We moved into the democracy. Local government councils were unilaterally dissolved by governors. And so that's a step back, it's a loss to democracy. People no longer thought they should hold their local government chairman responsible because they are there at the pleasure of the governor. At the level of the state, the same thing. Now, at the level of party, internal party democracy, the same problem. And so you find that even at the level of the there's the fundamental and then there are the incidentals. At the level of the fundamentals of democracy, which is values, how we relate, the fact that you have a right to a free choice and the rest of it, we've lost mileage at the level of fundamentals. At the level of incidentals, which you will then say are the dividends of democracy, what are the indices? What will you call the key performance indices? Is it social infrastructure? Is it roads? Is it electricity? Is it citizen welfare? Is it the state of the economy? Is it national security? So even at the level of incidentals, that look, you've got it right at the fundamental level, all the values are right. Now, at the level of living, we've lost substantial mileage across all measuring platforms. So my initial observation here is that as we celebrate democracy today, International Democracy Day, there are about 4 questions to ask. Does democracy necessarily improve citizen welfare? That's number one. Number two, the understanding of democracy. Is it possible to have the institutions of democracy and no democracy? Because we have all the institutions. The answer is also yes. Is it possible to, replace what you call the people with interests of probably the three of us. And so when we speak of democracy, government of the people, by the people, for the people, it turns out to be government of Hussaini, okay, and the Maokbe, Foke and Maokbe, and the rest of the people in the hall are getting angry on our behalf when we quarrel. Those are the issues.
It's amazing. I mean, you even have to chuckle as well. Yesterday, I was involved in a conversation right here in our studios, and it was very interesting. We're looking at internal party politics in the APC. They're getting ready for their state congresses, and as a matter of fact, they'll start sale of forms today. It was very interesting seeing how even saying that we're practicing a democracy within political parties.
It's not happening.
Within political parties, they're afraid of voting. They'd rather have consensus candidates. And this, it's very interesting, because if that's how it's run in political parties, largely it will seem that maybe that is what is also happening at the polls. There is some ceremony around, voting. But maybe there is sometimes unspoken agreement that, there have been, I don't know. I'm just saying. Because, I mean, the implications of the question I'm asking has far-reaching ramifications. First and foremost, we're worried about the kinds of candidates that are thrown up at elections. And then we also worry about the sanctity of the polls. We've been saying in recent times voter apathy, and a lot of people, are trying to reinvigorate the populace, the electorate, to say, look, your votes will count. Your votes do count. Your vote is your power. And people should go out to the polls. However, if it does seem that somehow this consensus candidacy business continues from inside the political parties to the polls, even amongst political parties, isn't there a problem? Is our democracy in danger? Let me ask you if you sense this.
Well, I want to affirm a lot of what the doctor said in terms of the previous challenges that face Nigerian democracy. There's no escaping it, like I said. And you're right to say that the parties are key culprits in blocking the path or keeping us at a stage that's far from what is generally desirable. You're right to also point out the significant challenges of insecurity, the economy that's not distributing resources equitably, the list goes on, corruption, etc. But I just want to say that I think it's important to also be careful in having that conversation within a context where, in the wider sub-region, we've seen 3 coups in, a period under a year, at least 5 months.
Very true.
So I think that we should also affirm these values, and despite the fact that they are not being realized, because we've seen the opposite, and it certainly has not redounded to the benefits of the wider citizenry. So I think it's important just to affirm that to begin with, and say that even the symbol of one person, one vote is not meaningless. It's a base from which we can build a functional democracy. That we've not gotten there yet, or that there are significant challenges that have emerged in the context of us trying to practice this, is a given that I think even people in power would admit to. So I guess, in summary, what I would say there is that what are the solutions, right? What's the way forward? It can't be simply throwing our hands up and saying that there are significant challenges and, what do we do next? Or it can't be retreating into out of the public sphere into our private spaces and deepening the apathy that you so rightly point to. It has to be more democracy, actually. And this is particularly true within the parties, as you say. If we don't have the capacity within parties to select candidates on the basis of their popularity, on the basis of their platform, then ultimately the choices that the wider electorate is presented with are already narrowed. So I completely agree with the sentiments there from the perspective of the essential kind of requirement of needing to deepen party democracy. And we certainly are far from where we want to be. But I think there's enough, there is a base that we can build on. And I want to say that I find that that's quite important to emphasize.
Well, I don't know if you see a streak there, even though you have recommended that the cure to our ills is even more democracy. The cure to little democracy is even more democracy. However, sometimes you do sense a pushback. You sense a pushback from political parties. I'm just wondering now if you see a streak of hope. I mean, in recent times, we've seen not just, yes, the polls are one thing, but the part of governance that should come with, that should come with our democratic process, the path of accountability. We've seen in recent times more and more young people who are the majority of our demographic demand accountability. And indeed, as you rightly pointed out, there are things to celebrate in this democracy. Yesterday, I happened to be at the anniversary celebration of Budget, the NGO which is, set itself to, explain the budget of the national of the federation, not just at the federal level, but also at the state level, down, to ordinary citizens and put that as a tool. However, a fundamental question was asked as to how we're engaging, even with the information at our disposal. Some people say, however, that the fact that such an organization can exist and it was formed by young people does point to the fact that there is an increasing engagement with the process, however slow the results might be. Is it something that you agree with? Does it really give you hope that indeed more and more, because we've seen protests so far, but we've also seen young people putting in the work to say, we're not just going to be, shouting slogans, we're also willing to do the work that you will need to move this country forward?
Yes, I'll respond to that. After that, I'll touch on the solutions. Yes, it is good that the budget should be interrogated all the way, across all the levels. So it's a positive development. But beyond the interrogation of the budget, they must take two other steps. Answer the question, is there a difference between expenditure and impact on citizen welfare? The answer is yes. So that organization has to take that further step. Okay, you've spent X amount of money on roads. Do you now have roads? You spent so and so amount of money carrying out this project. That project you carried out, who did it serve? The contractor or the people? Mr. Governor, you've spent $4 billion on new schools. Did you recruit new teachers? The ones around, did you spend money training them? Did you improve their pay? So this is a very good, so it's a platform. We can only now give them more and more to put on the table. Now, having dealt with that, we move to the next.
Oh, no, they say that what they're trying to do is provide the information so the citizens can ask the questions.
I'm giving them more work. There is no citizen platform. You see, let's not set up delusional platforms. I set up an NGO and our business to just ask questions and go home. We think we're doing enough. You must do terrain analysis. What kind of citizen do we have that I'm giving this assignment? Where do they meet? Nowhere. So you that have awakened, the consciousness that has risen in you, take on the job. There's no place on earth where citizens, first, what medium did you use? Newspapers, right? Television. In a country where over 68% of the people at any material time do not have electricity. And where those who really listen to radio have specific stations they listen to. I'm talking genuine national development now. Go do the real work that will matter.
But isn't that a problem? Because
it is.
How do citizens then engage?
The point is this. Citizen engagement means that if you want to engage, probably there are 3 people who listen to him. I go and talk to him. There are 19 people who listen to you. I come and talk to you. There are power centers all over the country. If you want things to happen in my town and you establish a relationship with the town union president, you have a 50% head start. I want to go to a particular community in Kano, and I look around. There are a few popular imams, and I talk with them before I get to the people. The fact that they'll be sitting beside me has given me endorsement. So this elite artificial engagement where we make speeches in halls containing 300 people, and assume we are addressing not just the United Nations, but people in their kitchens. The elite, the young people who are trying to make a change, must also understand the national demographics. It's not about headlines, it's not about reports, it's not about getting an award. Promise the youth to watch in the next 5 years, you keep the plaque in your house, and you appear to, no, it's more than that. Our country is in trouble. We need development. So they must be commended for this, but we should put more on their table. This is help. Help us. The citizens you're saying you're showing the figures, they don't know what to do with it. It doesn't impact their lives. That's assignment one. Assignment two, let them push state governments and the federal government to budget in consultation. You come to my village, you say we need what you might call a legacy project, and you build a fine monument. And that's all you've done for me. It makes no impact. So this is a good thing. They should build on it. The other thing on the matter of what to do, solutions. You see, our parties are the way they are today because they are not parties until a few months before elections. Let all the political parties every month have at least one rally in 1 or 2 or 3 local governments merged throughout the 4 years, whether they're in power or not. Now, that enables party members to come together. That enables party chairmen across the local governments to meet each other. That enables them to quarrel over funds for hiring buses and all of that. Then you build party solidarity. You leaders will know themselves. It's not so during the election they come together. Second is when he became chairman, there was a workshop they organized, ever the takeoff. These were some of the things I put on table for them. We need political opposition, not because we hate the party in power, but because with opposition, the party in power will perform better. Awu showed us the example. So please have these rallies, rotate it among all the local governments, and it's affordable. What does it require? If the parties begin to do that, the first thing that will happen is that we begin to build followership. You'll find that 2 of us can quarrel because I don't agree with what's in your manifesto, and you don't agree with mine. That shows we're becoming ideological members of our parties, and not just people who attend rallies and are giving money, among several other measures. But I'm sure my colleague will have something to say before I get back on that.
Okay, but just before you say anything, let's quickly play this report. Dr. Kayode Fayemi and trying to remember who now, but Dr. Kayode Fayemi was asking citizens to be more alert. You have, to participate more in our democracy. You have said that there are no, the platforms are not exactly the platforms for engagement, and they're power silos, you would say, all over the country. But we'll come to that. Let's quickly take a listen to this report.
To this, please. Several advocacy groups gathered to mark a decade of critical analysis of Nigeria's budgeting system, organized by civil society organization Budget. One issue that continues to dominate conversations at events like this is how to open up the political space for citizens' participation.
Almost 3 decades ago,
Ekiti State Governor Dr. Kayode Fayemi joins the conversation virtually. He and a former Minister of Information, Mr. Frank Wike Jr., urged citizens to hold elected political leaders accountable for their actions.
Our pursuit of a more result-driven democracy that translates to meaningful developmental outcomes cannot be achieved without robust citizens' engagement and effective participation in public affairs. It is therefore time that we, the people, assume our authority and wield the inherent power to place a demand on good governance and institutional accountability.
in the transition to an open, transparent, and more accountable state, efforts have been made at all levels to reduce corruption by reforming erstwhile opaque and largely secretive financial management systems. The added value in a civil society monitoring initiative such as this is the degree to which it empowers the broader citizenry to demand change from the elected authority by monitoring performance in an independently verifiable manner.
The open governance system is a structure that encourages transparency in government, with citizens having access to government data and holding leaders accountable. The Minister of Budget and National Planning emphasizes the need for civil society groups to collaborate with the government.
I think you need to work with us more as a partnership rather than being seen as an attack dog. because that doesn't help. Because if I see you as an enemy, then I'm not going to open my books to you, no matter what you say.
The Nigeria civic space has opened up gradually in recent years, but the consensus at this meeting is that more young people need to participate and ask the right questions on the stewardship of political leaders.
Well, I'll be asking my guests to react to that in a moment, but I hear that Kayode has a question. Kayode.
Well, thanks, Mark. But I think I'll just merge it together because it's quite important to keep that flow from that particular event. And let me take this to Dr. Hussaini now. And pardon me, I'll keep going back like everyone to Mark West's definition, or at least the general definition of democracy, which she started off with. And I think it makes a big assumption, and I probably would just like you to clear that once and for all. It makes an assumption that, yes, democracy is a government of the people, by the people, for the people. Now, you see people being repeated in that definition, essentially saying that people naturally want to be involved in government, as in actively involved, not just some section of people, right? Not just the political elites, party members, but everyone, the people, essentially, 200 million Nigerians. Do you think that is true for Nigeria from what you have seen? Do you think the average Nigerian, I mean, for the lack of a better term, every Nigerian really wants to be involved in government and by extension, this democracy?
Thanks, Kayode. Interesting question, and actually somewhat theoretical question. I guess I would respond to that in two ways. One is to say that, of course, there are people who are not necessarily political or politicized. There are people who have other interests that, take up their time, and there should be space for that. Not everybody wants to engage in these sorts of conversations. Some people want to get about their day. But I think on a more fundamental level, there is something, there is an aspect maybe of who we are as human beings, and this is true of Nigerians, this is true of people in other countries and across the world. There is something, I think, about us that prompts us to desire some level of autonomy. So people, to put it plainly, are involved in self-government on a daily basis. People are making decisions that, or want to make decisions that make their lives better. So I think that's the foundation of the idea of democracy, is that why don't we give people at the macro scale the decision-making capacities that they desire at the micro scale, right? People want to be able to make basic decisions that order their private lives. The idea of democracy is to extend that into the public sphere. And by and large, in the context of Nigeria, we've seen that people want to exercise that right. Sure, there's questions of voter apathy. Sure that people are often disillusioned or cynical about one election after the other producing quite similar developmental results. But at the same time, we've not seen really substantial demands for any alternative form of government. And in fact, whenever people are polled about alternatives, for instance, autocracy or military rule, overwhelmingly Nigerians say that they don't want that alternative, right? That they prefer at least, the basic allowances of being able to cast your vote. So, on the one hand, I hear you. Not everybody is politicized or political, but on the other hand, I think fundamentally we can all agree that we want to make decisions about our private lives. So why shouldn't we, given that capacity, also have the space to make decisions about how we order society more generally?
But by extension, then, you're saying that we'll never have that kind of democracy that we want to get until we decentralize, as it were. And I know this conversation is not about the whole restructuring debate and, give more powers to the federative units kind of talk. But from what you're saying, you say that everyone essentially is interested in some sort of self-governance. And I imagine that it will mean having to decentralize such that people at the local government levels can come together and say, well, this is what we want, and have some sort of power to back that up. So if we're going to move from the hybrid kind of democracy which Nigeria has been said to be practicing to proper democracy, are you essentially saying that we cannot get there until we restructure?
Well, I think leaving aside the kind of quagmire of restructuring, it's certainly true that we need much more accountable government, at the very local level. And as my fellow panelists have said, the local government has been eroded of its capacity to provide services and to actually be a tier of government that reflects the aspirations of local people. So local governments are frequently dissolved and replaced with caretaker governments. And of course, that removes democracy at the level where it, in theory, should matter most. So we certainly need much more robust, much more independent, much more empowered and accountable local governments. There's no debating that. And I think you will find very few Nigerians who would oppose that. So in a way, I think that's already, that debate, so to speak, is already resolved in our context. So why don't we have, if there's by and large quite a large amount of support, almost ubiquitous support for increased self-government at the local level, then why don't we have that? And I think those are the sorts of questions that require answering urgently if we are to make substantial progress as a democracy. So just to affirm that again, certainly there's widespread outcries for much more autonomy at the local government level. And in fact, you will hear political office holders constantly affirm it rhetorically. But how can we get from that rhetorical affirmation to the actual implementation and institutionalization of accountable and open and independent local governments? And I think that will be a critical marker of progress for us as a country that we are frankly, again to echo the other panelists, we are frankly yet to accomplish.
In your research, I'd like to know, what was the fundamental difference in terms of, looking at it across Africa in comparison to Nigeria, particularly when it has to do with political participation on the part of the people? Where does that change need to happen more? Is it at the elite level or at the grassroots level, in order for us to have more semblance of democracy?
Thanks, Chamberlain. I would say that there needs to be more civic participation across the board. And there we're talking about kind of ordinary people, the voters, right? We're talking about citizens, not necessarily political office holders, because of course they are engaged in politics nonstop. I mean, they do more politics than governance, right? So they are very politically active. What we're talking about is people who are outside of power. And the sorts of political participation that I think would substantially transform the country have to occur, again, across the board. It has to be at the very local level, at the state level, at the national level. It has to be within political parties. It also, believe it or not, has to even be at the workplace, right? We need to have, for democracy to substantially progress, we have to practice it, right? We have to actually get the opportunity or increase the available opportunities to practice it, to practice the capacity to make decisions, in a way that favors, agreed upon rules, that favors people's rights or power to choose for themselves. So I think, once again, within political parties, at the very local levels, at the state levels, at the national levels, it's those countries where you see a very robust civic engagement, where you see citizens challenging decisions that they don't like, affirming decisions that actually move their interests forward. It's in those contexts that you see economic progress and that you see increased social cohesion. Whereas in contexts such as ours, where people are increasingly alienated from the political process because the cost of participation is so high, where there's violence or where effectively people are doubtful about whether or not their votes count, then people are forced to take other forms of political engagement in order to express their views. And sometimes those forms are
if I could
less
just
than
jump
desirable, you know. So we've seen
So,
people embrace violent means of expressing themselves as citizens in the absence
in
of
different
having
parts of Africa, still on the same democratic dispensation, but you know, we have tried the parliamentary system, then you've got this system. In other parts as well, you have those who have the parliamentary system of governance, and then systems such as ours, which we presently are practicing at the moment. Was there any fundamental difference in terms of, you know, that governance getting to the people or enhancing their participation as a result of those two systems of governance, from what your research?
Yeah, so, I mean, my work is not primarily focused on comparing parliament to the presidential system, but I think, you know, even Nigeria's own history is interesting, teaches us interesting lessons about the benefits, say, of parliamentary system versus the presidential one. Because, you know, say, prior to the 70s, when we abandoned the parliamentary system and embraced the presidential one, you still had a plurality of parties within parliament, right? Say, you had parties that represented sort of progressive or social democratic traditions. You had parties that claimed to be conservative. You know, you had parties that articulated competing economic visions. You know, you had what is popularly called ideology, right? Okay. In how parties competed. That remained true, you know, in the Second Republic, which was the first democratic republic we had in Nigeria.
All right.
Where we had a
Dr.
presidential system of government.
Pardon me to jump in here. Let me bring in
this.
Pardon my apologies. Let me bring Dr. Ikechukwu on this. You know, how easy or difficult is it to measure these things, especially perhaps if people talk about their lives, their livelihood, what has changed ever since they had the previous system of government, and then you have a democracy. Is it that straightforward to measure those indices, especially when it has to do with social issues, Dr. Ikechukwu?
No, it's usually not that straightforward. The quality of human capital and the political economy of the environment is usually an overriding consideration. You set up a parliamentary system and my behavior and your behavior doesn't change. Our priorities do not change. Our attitude to public resources do not change. You will get the same result. So that's about that, whether there are several or all kinds of systems. Then there's the question of the level of political maturity, both of the people and of the system. And finally, on the matter of measuring performance in terms of impact on the citizens, there are things to consider. At the level of the economy, it's not just about budgeting. Ease of doing business, has it improved? Environment of doing business, is it any better? Return on investment, how is it looking? Amount of money coming in from outside the country. So that in looking at democracy today as Democracy Day, the issues to consider are not just whether we are practicing democracy, but to isolate the pillars of democracy, note how well we're doing on some of those pillars, identify lapses that need to be remedied, identify the successes that need to be strengthened, and then for the parties to progressively involve the people. The question was asked earlier whether it will depend on the elite or the people to get involved. At the moment, it's the elite that holds the reins, that determines everything. And so you find that a change of operating rules, or if you like, rules of engagement, will naturally cascade down. If, for instance, the parties now begin to adopt slightly new methods, part of it will include political education of the people. It will impact how they affect whatever goes on around them. The concept of responsibility, for instance, needs to be understood across party lines, and they drill down how to occur. But to sit down and expect that the people, if I'm a member of a political party, we're all members of political parties, will all jump up in excitement and change the rules of engagement. As things are structured now, that cannot happen very easily, but it can happen if the party leadership progressive party leadership begins to design and implement reforms. And the thing to note about that is that a good deal of the time, those who criticize parties for their performance do not take the further step of seeing the challenges in the operating environment that are even constraining both the party leadership and the, if you like, party elders. So my summary take on that is that measurement could be done with the right or the wrong paradigms. If you measure democracy anywhere in the world by the existence of physical infrastructure based on expenditures, you could say that democracy has brought a lot of development, and you're talking about infrastructure. But you find that you can find exactly the same or even better quality of infrastructure in a dictatorship, so that's not the primary criterion. The primary criterion for measuring a democracy is the degree of liberty in the living space. The fact that you can disagree with me, and that even though I disagree with you, if it turns out that there are more people who are on your side, I will let what you want happen and not protest, because I've been given a chance to express myself. Now, if there's a lot more of that going on, then you're talking about a democracy. If you're asking whether our democracy has reached the ideal, it has not. If you're then asking, should we then abandon it because it hasn't reached the ideal, I'll ask you, when a child is born and is learning to walk, do you kill the child because he didn't walk in 1 month? No. It's a developmental process. There are lapses, like I said, even retrogressions, but we cannot, on account of that, determine that this journey can be terminated. It can't, it shouldn't. If we also look at the spaces that have been less than democratic in more recent times, you see that they've jumped into a ditch, like where the parties have occurred. Yes, people are talking about Arab Spring, and I ask myself, in the places it occurred, how is Libya today? Those countries are gone for good. So while it's possible to sit in your house and shout with excitement about many things, you've not considered that there will be no space to live in if those things come. But that also presents a warning to all of us who hold public responsibility to conduct state affairs in such a way that the desire to complain will reduce, the need to want change will reduce, and the sense of belonging and genuine citizenship and possibly patriotism will become part of public consciousness. That should be the focus. Those should be the reminders. That should be plaguing, in public consciousness on a day like this.
I think that, we can safely leave it there, but I'll quickly ask you for your closing comments. What would you like citizens to, and leaders perhaps, to take away on a day like this?
There have been a lot of positive steps made. There's been some progress in certain areas of our institutional and social life, but there's a long road ahead of us. And I think fundamentally it's important to emphasize that what is required here is more democracy, more spaces for us to exercise our right to self-government and not less.
I think it's a fine place to leave it. We have to thank you gentlemen for coming on Sunrise Early this morning. Dr. Oke Ikechukwu is the Executive Director of Development Specs Academy. Thank you for coming. And Dr. Saeed Hussaini is the Director of Research at the Center for Democracy and Development. We'll take a break now. When we come back, we'll be switching gears to the economy. Just stay with us.
The projects listed in the addendum to the 2018-2021 Federal Government External Borrowing Plan are to be financed through sovereign loans from the World Bank, French Development Agency, China Exim Bank, International Fund for Agricultural Development, IFAD, Credit Suisse Group, and Standard Chartered China Export and Credit in this total sum of USD, American dollars, $4,054,476,863 plus Euro 710 million and grant component of USD 125 million dollars. The Senate is kindly invited to note that the projects and programs in the borrowing plan were selected based on positive technical and economic evaluations and the contribution they would make to the socio-economic development of the country, including employment generation and poverty reduction, as well as protection of the most vulnerable and very poor segments of the Nigerian society.
Well, just before we get to our guests in Abuja for that economic subject matter, I would like to just inform you that at the moment, yes, it's happening now. The civil servants in Edo State have been denied access to the state secretariat for not carrying their COVID-19 vaccination cards. Remember, well, the information has been out there even today where the authorities have said that, look, if you've not been vaccinated, you will not be allowed access into certain spaces, and that the Secretariat happens to be one of them. So that matter is indeed developing at the moment.
You know, well, there will be questions as to just how much vaccines are available, I mean, for people in the first place. I'm not sure what the percentage of civil servants are in that state, but I mean, there will be questions as to whether or not you have enough to even go round, because I think that has been part of the conversation. Some countries saying, well, we want to go that route, but let's even ensure that we have enough, and then say you don't have an excuse for not getting. And I wonder, now that we're talking economy, what that will mean to the economy of the state.
Because you know how important the civil service is and the kind of work they do. So would there be distinction for those who have been scheduled to be vaccinated? I guess we'll bring that, we'll keep our eye on that particular matter. So there you go. Those are some of the civil servants who have been denied access to the state secretariat in Edo State for not carrying their COVID-19 vaccination. So it appears as though that enforcement is indeed going on as we speak. So we'll bring you more details on that matter as we get them. Mark.
Well, it's indeed a big story. I mean, this is also coming as we hear that the Ministry of Health is also trying to sensitize religious places to say, we're taking the vaccines to churches to see, you know, I mean, to take the vaccine closer to the people. So, I mean, quite a mix happening across the country, but the situation in Edo is certainly interesting, and we'll definitely keep tabs on it. Let's quickly let's switch gears now to the economy. Yesterday, you saw the National Assembly opening there from an 8-week recess, and on the floor of the Senate just before they adjourned in honor of one of their colleagues who passed during the recess. The Senate President did read a letter of request of loans from the President. And of course, you can see that that has taken over many of the front pages this morning. The President's request for loan in tandem with the MTEF. You know, the request for loans in the MTEF. So this morning, we're going to be asking our panelists whom we have in the studio. Mr. Wale Oluwade is the CEO of Growth Masters Consulting. You're welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Thank you, Mokwe.
And we also have Professor Ken Ife, who is an economist. You're also welcome to Sunrise Daily this morning.
Thank you.
Well, we're hearing now $4 billion is what the federal government is asking for, and we understand that our loan portfolio stands at about 33 trillion naira, or $87.239 billion. And analysts in general worried because much as we've been told that is a debt to GDP ratio looks fine, we know that our debt to revenue ratio is quite worrying. When you heard this loan request from the President, what were your first thoughts? Let's start with you, Prof.
Well, if I may, I've just had a little chat with my colleague, Wale. For the benefit of our viewers, it's good to set out what the key parameters are on the legal side, on financial ratios, and then also on socio-economic, so that we are on the same page when we begin to argue, because this is a highly contentious issue. On the legal side, the Constitution says anything to do with borrowing has to be on the exclusive list. So we're all clear where it belongs. Then the second one is that there is a law that governs borrowing, which is Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2007. And then it does say borrowing, it doesn't say external or domestic, any borrowing has to be for capital expenditure and human resource development. It has to be long-term, it has to be on concessionary terms. And then it also expects an analysis, what they call benefit ratio analysis, cost-benefit analysis, and as part of this, so as part of the due diligence. Then you come to the financial ratio. The only one that the FRA 2007 set was fiscal deficit to GDP at 3%. We know we are at 3.6%. We know that the Finance Act is sorting that out, and then we know that the FRA 2007 is up for renewal. They're amending it right now. But it also the law actually says within 90 days of passing it that the president should, on the advice of the minister and with the approval of the National Assembly, set the ratios, which means debt to GDP ratio is not set. The debt service to revenue ratio is not set, and then many other ratios. So then, it has to be, and it hasn't.
Prof, just before you go into the technicalities of this, what I want you to quickly answer was when you saw that, when you saw the Senate President, I don't know how you saw it, maybe you saw it on the news or you heard it over the radio, what were your immediate thoughts? That's what I wanted to know.
For me, it is not unexpected. And that's why I'm giving you the background.
It didn't come
so
as
that
a
you can
surprise
understand.
to you?
No, it doesn't. Because until you understand where I'm coming from,
yes, are you expecting
my reaction is going to be different because I have basis for my reaction. So it doesn't come to me as a surprise.
So you expected
Because let me tell you why it doesn't come as a surprise to me.
No, Prof, I'm trying to establish that you expected it first.
Oh, yeah, it's not the end. There's going to be more.
Okay.
And
we should expect more.
Oh, of course.
Okay.
But one thing you have to bear in mind is that in 2005, we were owing about $30 billion. 40% of that money was due to penalties and all kinds of infractions. But here, for 6 years, the government has been paying. It hasn't defaulted. And when you don't default, financial people will tell you, bankers will tell you, as long as you are keeping a clean slate and you are not defaulting, and then you are a resource-rich country, and, they just keep that. One person is in charge of just lending. When you come to debt issues, there's another department that deals with it. So they just keep lending. That's why you have so many people ready to lend the money. So many, you've seen the list of the people who are prepared to lend, World Bank, they're all ready to lend because they have confidence that it's a resource-rich economy. They are not defaulted. So when they input your data on the computer, it says, go ahead and lend, and they keep lending. So it doesn't worry me that much. But there are areas that worry me, which is the ability to repay the money. And then the ratios, you look at the ratios, they're not very pleasant. But there are concrete action that the government is taking to actually give us more confidence. So we'll come into all that detail.
And I think that's a detail that is important to us.
Okay.
We might as well get to it.
All right. Now, the government revenue to GDP is 6 to 8%. The average is 18%. We are the lowest in Africa. ECOWAS macroeconomic convergence criteria says 20%.
We've since established
that.
So
we should be doing 3 times more in revenue.
But
we are moving because the PIB or PIA now that was signed, you saw the inland revenue say, we're going to get towards our revenue 10 trillion, more than 10 trillion next year. Isn't that a movement that we're now going to expect double that revenue? Then you've seen actions being taken, Presidential Order 007, trying to get companies to get involved in infrastructure around them. Like you see Dangote and Bu are all using up to 50% of their revenue to do work to ensure that we are doing what needs to be done to make them more able to grow and then also pay more tax. Then you've seen the infrastructure company that is already capitalized with 1 trillion going out now to 15 trillion and is all in Naira, to now be able to take away all of this headache. The headache is infrastructure investment. Nigeria's stock of infrastructure is only 35% of our GDP. South Africa is 80%. Many countries are over 100%. So the deficit is there. The requirement, COVID is an existential problem. People were dying. So government has to borrow if it doesn't have the money. And in investment, when you want to invest in anything, you have to look for your saving. We don't have the saving, so you have to borrow.
Well, I can see Mr. Oluwade twitching almost to say something. I'm going to let him intervene on this matter when we come back from this break. We're talking about the economy now. This is as the president is seeking another $4 billion loan request making it to the National Assembly and seeking their approval there. We still have in our studios this morning Mr. Wale Oluwade and Professor Ken Ife, who are intervening on the matter. Just to quickly mention that this is also happening as the National Bureau of Statistics, you might have seen it scrolling there, has released the inflation report. They say it has tapered by about 0.37% to 17.01%. It does look like inflation came down in the month of August. Well, let me quickly take your own intervention now. When you did see that request, that loan request by the President to the National Assembly, first thing as they resumed yesterday, I don't know, were you worried, or did you think that, well, we need to do this in order to make progress?
Thank you, Makwe. Yeah, I was worried, you know, and while I understand the need for us to borrow to develop infrastructure, because we have a huge infrastructure deficit, you know, but I disagree with the federal government on the areas of investment of these borrowed funds. That's what gives me worries, you know. Now, it also speaks to the issue of what is a definition of an asset for a nation. Assets, roads and bridges and rails and all of that, or are assets, the human beings. You know, used to the multilateral institutions, World Bank, IMF, they used to rate nations basically on GDP, you know, solely. But later on they realized that GDP isn't a fair or accurate assessment of the strength or the growth or the health of a nation. So they now came up with the issue of human development indices. You know, so let me use the analogy of a family man, you know, who has money and says, because I'm under pressure constantly from landlord, you know, to pay rent, I need to build a house. And so neglect, you know, to fund the education of his children, saying they should wait. When I finish building this house, you guys will go to school. But then the house took 6, 7, 8 years, you know, to complete. For 8 years, the kids didn't go to school, you know. Now, he's built this house. The kids have grown with no education, with no skills. What are they going to do? From the part of the country where I come from, a father who does that, the Yorubas will say, those kids are going to turn around and sell off those assets. Now, there are risks and there are implications for what the federal government is doing. What are the risks? Huge cost, interest cost. Huge, you know, because what took us to the debt trap that we got into earlier on, that President Obasanjo wiped off, we're not just the loan stock itself, but accumulated, you know, interest that we're unable to pay. We're finding our way back there now, because don't forget, Maokwe, the basis of our ability to repay this loan is purely on one economic activity, which is crude oil. And the prices of the crude oil keeps fluctuating. We have no control over it. Another risk is that when you keep borrowing to fund infrastructure, you starve other key, you know, sectors of funds, human development, meaning education, healthcare, housing, and all whatnot. And thirdly, when you do this also, you starve funds that is needed to eradicate poverty. I mean, I could go on, not to also mention the fact that if you borrow to fund infrastructure, is governments, you know, do they have the skills to actually build, maintain, and operate different infrastructure rather than using alternative avenues? Now, in the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 1 month, thereabouts, I've watched you almost every other day, every other week, interview National Association of Residents of Doctors, Johesu or ASU. Why are they going on strike? I mean, I watched you with Dr. Mori or Ujulawa last week, threatening that, okay, they're not calling off their strike, and the president should have just dismissed the Minister for Health and his counterparts in labor and all of that. And I keep asking myself, what stops the president from just saying, because if I were in the president, should have just say, please call finance minister, can you just pay these guys? But how much exactly is involved? It's not to 120 billion naira. But then there is no money. Because the monies that Nigeria needs to fund critical social issues, social assets. I mean, if we had not learned any lesson, COVID last year should have taught us a lesson. You know that our first line of defense is our healthcare, and it's zero. I mean, the SGF had said when he visited a couple of those hospitals that I didn't know that the state of the healthcare facilities in Nigeria were this bad. But then even after he knew what has happened, you know, so
there are risks and there are implications. I just told you some of the risks and some of the implications. So we're owing doctors. ASU, as of yesterday, one of the papers said ASU is threatening to go on strike again because federal government has been unable to meet the commitments that they entered into in writing because the funds are not available. The funds are being put to, developing so-called infrastructure. Now, let's go back to the issue of is the debt to the...
As you rightly pointed out, the infrastructure is needed.
Yeah.
It's also needed to kickstart and facilitate economic activity. We have been told that inflation is on a runaway because, the cost of transportation is high. Before goods can get to the market, especially farm produce gets to the market, all of this, is making the cost of food items balloon, of course, add to it the security situation. And for those who have been, in recent times, been able to take the new trains from Ibadan to Lagos, from Abuja to Kaduna, and a few other places where the trains are now working, there's a sense of excitement, a sense that something new is, a sense of new possibilities, so to speak. And even though there are huge questions as to our ability to be able to pay back the loans used for that train, what the government keeps saying is that they're hoping to kickstart economic activities along these corridors and facilitate it, that they believe that this is going to have a long-term impact on the economy. Shouldn't we be doing all of it at the same time?
Mankwe, I beg to differ with you. Now, it is true that the debt to GDP ratios for OECD countries, you could actually call the OECD countries a club of debtors because their debt to GDP ratio is almost all of them over 100%. Actually, Japan is the highest with 257% debt to GDP ratio. But what is the secret? The secret is that, Japan, you watch the Olympics, you saw Japan. Japan doesn't look like a country that needs infrastructure anymore. The Human Development Index in Japan is so way high. Per capita index is huge. Now, but what are the key buffers? For you to go into this debt binging on debt as a nation, you must have buffers. Systemic buffers that immunes you, that ensures you against risk, that insulates you against risks, from the volatility of shocks in movement of, prices and all of that. Japan, like I said, is purely an export-driven economy. In this studio, most of these cameras will be stunned if they were not from Japan. Now, that is one. Number two, Japan has $1.3 trillion US raw cash in deposit. 1.3 trillion raw cash in deposit. Now, another critical factor is that Japan's tax to GDP ratio is 33%. The OECD average is 33%. The lowest is Mexico, maybe 16%. US is 24%. Now, if you disaggregate it further, of the 33% tax to GDP ratio, if you'll be stunned at the level of taxes that Japan generates. What is the tax to GDP ratio of Nigeria? We talked about this earlier on, 6.1. The tax debate on VAT and all of that, and everybody's going gaga about, VAT. That's not even the issue.
But we have capacity to even widen it. We have been told to widen the tax net, not even to increase the taxes, but to bring more people into the tax net.
I've been a major proponent of widening. That's what I'm saying. Now, that brings me back to the issue. If you have 100 million people living in extreme poverty, contributing next to nothing to this economy, what would a wise government do who is serious about, this government 2 years ago promised to lift 100 million people out of poverty. Can you tell me of any coherent strategic master plan to do that? None, to the best of my knowledge. Well, because we should be, we should be investing massively in SMEs. We should be investing massively in poverty eradication. That is the focus.
You say, that's, I don't know whether Professor Ken Ife would disagree with you, but, coherent master plan is your definition, is what you're looking for. We do know that there are plans towards lifting people out of poverty.
Okay, if there are plans, Mark,
just a moment.
Okay.
We've seen the social investment program, which was not existent before now. You might have issues with it, but these are the things that the federal government has come up with, at least at that level, and they're pretty novel.
Mark, a master plan to kickstarting this economy. We have a revenue crisis. That's the brouhaha. That's what all this brouhaha is all about.
Indeed.
So how do you do that? You have to grow the economy. And you do that based on tax revenues, taxes. Now, how do you generate tax revenues? Through SMEs.
You want them to tax the SMEs that are struggling to survive?
No. Why don't you create additional SME clusters so that you have more entrepreneurs? I mean, we had a brief discussion. You have entrepreneurs coming in as SMEs, and then you can get more taxes from them. That is how you grow. See, our tax to GDP is 6%, like I said. The IMF says the minimum threshold for an economy that wants to experience accelerated growth should be between 12 and 15%. Nigeria is way below that, 6.1%.
Okay, let me quickly bring Professor in here.
I do respect much of what he said, but if we are keeping the discussion around debt and debt sustainability, you wouldn't borrow money to pay salaries to sort out the issues around people going on strike. You couldn't borrow. The law doesn't allow you to borrow money to pay salaries. The reason why advanced economies are violating the benchmark of 60% debt to GDP and Japan going as well as 250 is simply because they have high infrastructure. In other words, their stock of infrastructure is so high. They are investment, there are $9 trillion sovereign funds available looking for where to invest. They won't come to Nigeria that doesn't have the infrastructure. They will go to that same Japan where there are infrastructure, irrespective of their debt, and put their money there. So that's very important. You know, infrastructure is what drives investors wanting to come into your domain. Then the other issue is about the tax. Now, Nigeria has on paper the lowest tax in Africa. But when you look at implicit tax, you find out that we are the highest. Now, what that means is there are studies that show that 60%...
What do you mean by
I'm coming to it
implicit
now.
tax?
I'm coming to it. There are studies that have shown that 60% of manufacturers actually say that 90% of the time they are providing their own power. So the cost of providing power is with them. The cost of building borehole and roads that connected they are carrying the burden. So the implicit tax is all the whole burden, tax burden. We're the highest. So now, also, there are 90 million MSMEs in Africa. 42 million of them are from Nigeria. So while Nigerian population is 18% of Africa, GDP 18% of Africa, can you believe that half of the MSMEs in Africa are from Nigeria? Yet we have all these issues about infrastructure, positive access to finance, all of this. It shows you that entrepreneurship is a latent comparative advantage for Nigeria. So you can't tax them away. You can't kill them away. We are having the lowest VAT, 7.5%, half. The average VAT is 15%. Some are 17%. We are having the lowest, as I said, but you can't use tax to finish them off. One strategy is to widen the tax base, which we are talking about. It's good, so that many more people come into the tax net. The other one is to reduce the leakages. Do you know that we have more money going into tax exemptions and tax waivers and then leakages than the revenue that the government is collecting? So the government is focusing on those. And I've mentioned about PIA going to bring double the revenue. So there are things the government is looking at to increase and triple the revenue to be able to relate to rest this issue about the vulnerability or the potential for liquidity crisis. And then also we haven't looked at assets. Assets are where you should be looking. The whole narrative around Nigerian debt is, they can't afford to pay, they're illiquid, don't give them more money, but the computer says something different. That's why they're all coming to give you the money. But when Saudi Arabia needed $25 billion, they didn't go to IMF or World Bank. They said, tell me the value of my Aramco. And they valued it as over 1.5 trillion. So, if I have that kind of money, give me 5%. We went to the capital market. We should be doing that with thousands of companies owned by the government. So we have to establish national asset register, we have to value these companies, and then we have to put them on the market or get investors based on their value so that government's borrowing is now based on assets. And it changes the narrative, it brings more liquidity into the system.
Let me take this conversation out to Lagos. Coyote.
Well, thank you, Mark. Very interesting conversation, and I know that this will always be a big debate. Prof, let me start with you, really, because for a lot of Nigerians, they judge based on, the trend of borrowings they have seen. I mean, just when they are done or about to be done talking about this loan request to the Senate they say another one, $4 billion. I mean, they were just talking about one, was it July or June, and just in April as well. So clearly this, I don't know, will be an ongoing conversation. And there are questions as to when this enough will be enough, as it were. Where are we planning to get to? But let me just begin my own intervention by asking you, in terms of sustainability, because that's also another question. People look to the future and say, what will become our fate in 10 years, 20 years, when we're no more and our children have to be the one at the helms of affairs? Would we be able to pay back? Looking at the budget performance just from January to May, we made 1.84 trillion naira, right? And about 1.8 trillion, almost all of it was used to service debt. So in terms of sustainability, I mean, major revenue comes from oil. Oil output has dropped to, 1.2 million barrels per day. Yes, the price of crude oil is about $70, $73. But, I mean, you remember that we had 40, we were struggling with even below that. So in terms of sustainability, are you confident, really, that we can sustain this in 5 years or even more?
Well, I have to tell you that more debts are going to be coming. So that's not the end of it. But the question is the legality of this. The law says, well, actually, so far, it's captured in the, it was foreseen.
You have dealt, Prof, I think you have largely dealt with the legality.
And it was in the borrowing plan.
Prof, pardon me, I think you have largely dealt with the legality. In fact, you started on that note. But the sustainability, I've referenced crude oil production. We are doing 1.23, and you know what we actually benchmarked was way more than that. So sustainability now.
Okay, crude oil will only account for 50% of government revenue. And in the new dispensation, having sorted out the PIA, you've had the projection that from the FIRS that their revenue will double to over 10 trillion. So which means that, in fact, a lot more revenue is going to be coming. And with the kind of measures that I've outlined, where the government is now bringing a private infrastructure company, capitalizing it to 1 trillion, heading out for 15 trillion, that whole infrastructure that has been chastising all of us in terms of borrowing is going to be passed over to the private sector to manage. And that is where you're going to see a more efficiency scrutiny on this and better management and more confidence, because they'll be going to the market to support all that action. So we will be seeing the near end to this, but it's not yet. But don't forget again that one crucial issue is this. We are a nation at war in the 6 geopolitical zones. Many countries in the size of our conflict and security challenge would have been borrowing heavily to persecute the war. And they would have been imposed 40% war tax on the citizens. But we're not doing any of those. So we're just managing within our means. We've already identified the culprit. The culprit is government revenue. And we are saying, what's government doing about it? And there are a series of measures that are kicked in where government is heading to 3 times their current revenue. And I can outline those. Some I have already mentioned, but there are many things that they are doing, because I happen to look into some of the committees where they are doing this. I can know what is going on, but there isn't enough time to talk about all of them.
I mean, it's good to have some informed opinion from you. It's quite good to have the informed opinion from you, and I think we'll lean on that a lot during the course of this conversation. But some of the assumptions you make, like I said, are assumptions. You've said that a lot of things will come on board, and then we'll triple our revenue, I mean, remember what happened last year. We had I would say, a great plan. Budget was passed quite early. COVID-19 hit, and we all know what came out of that. We're still trying to recover. So do we have a contingency plan? Because all these assumptions, who knows what will happen to the price of crude? Who knows how implementations will go? I mean, you understand this thing. So if we're basing our future on these assumptions, we don't pray for any disaster, but who knows what might happen to some of these projections we have made in terms of economic realities. Do we have a contingency plan? Again, can we sustain it?
I think I cannot write off the possibility that we can sustain the loan because of what I'm privy to. But having said that, nobody knew COVID was coming. But when COVID did come, there was a massive fiscal and monetary quantitative response. And that was why you had us jump out of it within a quarter. So you couldn't avoid borrowing in those circumstances. In fact, the minister said from the outset that her budget is going to be hit by 60%. But by the end of the 2020, we ended up spending more than what the budget was expected. So it's, we haven't seen the end yet, but there are more to it than we can share on this screen in the few minutes that we have available.
Okay, so Mr. Oluwade, I wonder what comes to mind when you hear Prof say, the borrowings will keep happening. I wonder how you interpret that. Earlier on, you said borrowing is not the problem, but hearing that this will keep happening. I know there are plans already for the 2022 budget and even how the borrowings will go. So the question is, when will it be too much, really?
Okay, the thing is this. We only keep focusing on the absolute quantity.
Prof, pardon me. This is for Mr. Oluwade.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kayode. On the sustainability question, it is not sustainable. And why do I say so? In the MTEF, medium-term expenditure framework, fiscal strategy paper that the finance ministry sent to the Senate for 2021 to 2024 budget projections, it was stated clearly, that Nigeria was going to use 47.8, roughly 48% of its revenues in the next 4 years, that is beginning 2021, 2022, 2023, 2024, for debt service. So meaning, in layman terms, if you earn 100 naira, you're going to use 48 naira of the 100 naira to service debt. That is clearly unsustainable. And like I said, there are risks and there are implications of this risk. Now, one of the clear ones that we're seeing is that Nigeria is looking for money to meet essential services, critical services, education, healthcare, housing needs, and the list, goes on. Now, back to the issue of what is an asset and what do we need to borrow? Of course, I would not be surprised if more debt comes because, I think the National Assembly actually approved, maybe a sum of 24 billion thereabouts, for the executive arm of government, and they're just taking them in piecemeal. That's what you see they keep applying for, in tranches. So I expect to see this coming. My worry, like I said, is what these monies are being put, into use. That's what gives me worry because, there are alternative financing models, for infrastructure. Prof knows, I know, and some of you know as well, that why don't you get some of these critical infrastructure that we're, getting these loans to build, why don't you concession them? Get private sector investments to fund these assets, for goodness sake. Because that way, the private sector comes with their expertise, with their know-how, with their funds to do these assets, and then it's on a long term, 20, 30 years concessional agreements, and then they're able to recover their investments and then transfer the assets back to the federal government. Meanwhile, the federal government has the revenues to do what the federal government is, what every government is in existence to do. By law, the role of the government is the welfare and security of its citizens. The question is that, is the government meeting the welfare and security of Nigerians? Because if you have 100 million people living in extreme poverty, you have 23% youth unemployment figures, and of the 33%, 42% of that are youth unemployment. Of course, you're going to have the disaster that we have currently of insecurity everywhere, and then if you have unemployment, so what are you going to do? A responsible government, in my mind, should develop MSMEs, fund aggressive funding for MSMEs. And I also agree with what Prof said about the PIA, brilliant legislation, and I think, but the trick or the deception is to think this is going to kick in 1 or 2 years. It's not going to happen. Even the implementation alone, the committee set up, they have almost 18 months to come on stream with the layout of how the PIA is going to work, the unbundling of the NNPC and all of that. So you don't expect anything meaningful coming out of the unbundling of the NNPC, the implementation of the PIA in the next 3 to 5 years. But you can actually, like I said, NNPC, I'm glad it's going to be privatized or commercialized eventually. So, monies will begin to come in, it's begins to turn out a profit, like the NLNG. I'm glad. So we can list the stocks of the NNPC on the stock exchange, and get revenues from that.
Well, the NNPC says that they have already started making profits.
No, that's subject to serious scrutiny. That's subject to debate.
Agreed, agreed. But I mean, that's what they have said. So maybe it does point to some potential, which you cannot ignore.
No, absolutely.
We also know that the implementation committee, I think, has 12 months to be able to lay out a plan in terms of how this is going to be implemented.
And then after that, begin the implementation of the process.
But from all that you have laid out, uneasy indeed lies the head that wears the crown at this point. Not very many easy solutions. We have to thank you, gentlemen, for coming and sharing your thoughts on the program this morning. I do know that this conversation on our loan and where we are with our debt profile is an ongoing one, and we will be seeking your insights certainly in the coming days. Thank you so much for coming on the program this morning, Professor Ken Ife, who is an economist, and Mr. Wale Oluwade, who is the CEO of Growth Masters Consulting, speaking to us here in our Abuja studios. Well, we're not going without taking your mails. Let's quickly take a look at a few of them. Famous Timilein says, talking about borrowings now, he says, borrowing is not bad, but it should be sensible. My people say that you can't be eating eba and you want to add corn or maize to eat in your mouth at once. We should finish with one loan before going for another. Uncompleted projects are everywhere. These trends should be worrying. Let's help this nation. That's from Famous Timilein.
Quite interesting illustration there, Famous. Well, next one is from Festus Akimboyewa, still on Nigeria's, on the economy, Nigeria's debt profile, saying the reality is that our debt as a country may exceed $45 billion by the end of this year because of COVID-19. Very weak economy and low revenue. FG must be given extra flexibility to raise revenue. Petrol subsidy is not sustainable and it should go now. Also, FG must sell all our non-performing assets.
Well, Henry, talking about democracy, says democracy, open governance, stewardship, and accountability seem to have different meanings in our country. A few weeks ago, a court in Abuja threw out a case seeking to enforce the provisions of Freedom of Information Act and described the plaintiff as a meddlesome interloper. Who, how, where, and when should citizens ask questions and get answers?
Well, Professor Enakena says the strengthening of our democracy comes with providing the greatest number of good for the greatest number of persons by a government that provides greatest number of egalitarian opportunities by a government chosen by greater number of persons. Well, I think that's a new definition of democracy. But I think it certainly covers the idea that it needs to work for at least, if not all, at least most people.
Okay, this final one, still on democracy strengthening, or the truth is that selfishness and lack of genuine vision of some of the elites in Nigeria are the major reasons why we keep growing, but we're dwindling in terms of development. That's from Olariwaju Olalekon.
All right, well, we did bring you this news as we progressed. More civil servants were prevented from accessing the state secretariat in Edo State as a result of them not coming with their COVID-19 vaccination cards. So they were shut out of the state secretariat. So it's something that is developing. We're keeping tabs on that matter, and we will bring you more on that story as we get them. So you need to just watch this space, as we say. Well, there you go. That is it today on Sunrise Daily. We do thank you all for letting us be a part of your day. We will be back again tomorrow. I'm Chamberlain. Also,
I'm Kayode Okikiolu.
And Maokwe Ogun Yusuf. Do have a lovely day.